Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. I'm with Alan Sides. We're at Studio A here at Sweetwater. We've got cool monitors going on here. Great to have you back with us, sharing some monitor wisdom. You've been doing the speaker thing for a while.
A long time. I think my first speaker system, I was 13 years old when I built my first system. So
Wow.
been doing it for a few years.
Yeah. Well, we were listening to the Ocean Way monitors here, and man, in a good room, well, in any room, but in a good room, wow. Yeah. They're mind-blowing. They really are. Let's talk a little bit about that, though. What is it that makes a great monitor, first of all? If someone's looking at buying a monitor, what is it that makes a great one?
Well, you know, I think there's a couple of lines. I think accuracy, meaning that you're really getting a definitive, accurate, presentation of what you're hearing. Because if you're not, it's just, for me, it's just an uphill fight if you can't hear correctly. Mm-hmm. If you're hearing correctly, even if you're not using the best gear, you'll hear it, what's wrong, and you'll fix it. But if you can't hear that, things will get by that shouldn't get by. Like a speaker that's really inappropriate. Certain S's and vocals and certain low frequency, pops and things, you wouldn't hear them.
Yeah.
Just go running by, and then they cut the disc, and oh my God, what the hell was that? I didn't hear it until after the fact. Hearing accurately, I just don't think there's anything more important. For me as a mixer, my life is easy. And anytime, even when I go and I bring my speakers into a studio and I'm sitting there mixing, I will spend a lot of time finding the perfect position for those speakers and balancing it out. And if I have a sub, I'll figure out the perfect position for that so I get the results I want. Because the other thing that's important to me is my loudspeakers that I'm playing, I have an audience. I have all these musicians sitting with me. I want them to hear the same thing I'm hearing. I want what I'm hearing to be an accurate balance, but I want them to be able to stand on either side of me and hear the same thing I'm hearing.
Right.
And that makes a big difference.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the importance of positioning in the room. I know you were just talking about that, but let's dig deeper into that and how you go about finding the perfect position.
Yeah, the first thing we're looking at is, if you're in a small home studio and you have a lot of live surfaces in the room, it's awfully tough. Because the problem is you're trying to hear mostly direct sound. So your mix is going to take in all this stuff that's in your room.
Right.
And when you leave that room, what you hear is going to be very different when you play in your car or outside. So we're really trying to hear as much direct sound as possible. So if you were in a sort of an imperfect room, and I've worked in a lot of spaces that were not perfect, but if I have a couple of moving blankets or even towels, say I had a pair of small speakers and I'm sitting right here in the center position, I could put a moving blanket on a mic stand here and one on a stand on the right side, and I can get rid of those side reflections. And then if I move myself up into the center, it makes a night and day difference to what I'm listening to in that space. It doesn't fix everything, but it gets me into a position where at least I can hear a reasonable simile of what I think is coming out of the speaker. Right,
so you're treating that first reflection point,
yes,
which is going to cause the biggest interference with the direct signal.
Yeah, because what happens is, and then it happens, it can be ceiling or sidewalls, but happens, it's just hitting the sidewall and it's coming back and it's either adding or canceling right where you're sitting. So you're hearing all sorts of oddities in response. Mm-hmm. Also, it tends to be, sometimes if you have a lot of live surfaces, it can be quite a bit harsher. Mm-hmm. So you end up ducking certain instruments that shouldn't be ducked because they're sounding harsh in this room because the room is so live. And these reflections are causing rises in response in certain mid-range frequencies that really aren't there.
Right.
Then the next thing is low end, because low end is such an important thing in pop music these days. And definition, you have to have a speaker that has the capacity to have reasonable extension so that you know what's on your final mix. Mm-hmm. And there are small speakers now that do go low and that you can hear that. Or if you have even a single sub and you have it balanced out correctly, the same thing, that it's knowing that when you walk out of your room, what you're hearing is when you walk out is correct, that's all.
We were listening to the big speakers before, the big Ocean Ways, and obviously they go way down there.
Yes.
But even the small ones, that's a hallmark of what I hear coming from the Ocean Way monitors.
I just, because I'm a bass player too, but for me, I need to hear that extension to really balance too. When I'm hearing the entire balance, I need to know where the 40 hertz is sitting in reference to 5K, because it's a direct proportion balance. Mm-hmm. When they're matched, you can have, it's what Bruce Wooding once said to me, he says you can have as much bass as you want as long as it's clear. Because the other thing too is if you have a speaker that doesn't produce that and you're listening to a kick drum and bass and you're pushing it and the speaker is almost popping out of its cone because you can't hear it. You can actually hear it in your car, but you can't hear it in the speaker that you got to hear.
Right.
So you have to determine how much bass there is by how far the cone's moving. The old NS10 scenario. We didn't really know how much bass we had, so we said, no, that's too much, the sweet spot. So you bring it down, okay, I think that's probably the best. But you really don't know until you get out of the room.
Right.
So there are ways to do that that are, and what I often do is like I'll go into a room and I'll play material I know. That sounds really good. I know exactly what it sounds like. And then I'll start moving them around. I'll find a position in the room that I think sounds best.
Right.
Same thing, because if they're ported from the rear, they may need to be closer to the rear wall to get the right reflection. If they're ported from the front, it may not be as big an issue. And the other thing too is the rear wall, how far you have that. That's going to affect how good the bass is. Sometimes if you have a rectangular room, but the depth isn't great on this dimension, and you get a tremendous null right in the mix position, you can move the speakers to the short wall. And sometimes you can find a spot that works much better. Even though it's a shorter distance, you will get a buildup, but if you get the buildup at the right spot, it's fine. Because actually, if you move your chair all the way back, you'll get too much bass at the back, and you'll slide it in. You may find a spot that's just this A level, you know, because, and you say, so in this range, even though I'm going to build it back here, I'm getting really good bass right here. I did a room over at Village for T-Bone Burnett that has these speakers here. And it didn't really have the right amount of depth, but it had a buildup that was perfect. And we ended up moving the console back a little bit, and we managed to get a really great sweet spot in a room that should never have had that kind of bass.
Yeah, I've been in that room, and you walk in and think, well, that isn't the way I would have.
Exactly.
The way conventional wisdom would tell you that the room should be set up.
Totally right. And
Yeah.
it
works.
It sounds ridiculous. Yeah.
It works. That's so fun.
Yeah.
Well, I've been preaching the gospel of having reference tracks going back to my days with EQ magazine. In the day, I had a CD.
Sure.
Now, of course, we can have high-res files.
Yeah.
That we can play back and have full resolution and title with high res or whatever.
I mean, title's been very helpful because it allows you to reference. You know. And although title, you know, obviously it is full bandwidth and everything, but the funny thing is the CDs still usually sound better.
Yeah.
It's within, 8%.
Yeah.
But it's way better than MP3s, obviously.
Right. But the key is just to hear things that you really know well,
Well, and even if there's a recording that you think is really, really great, and it's kind of a reference point, put it up. And then when you do your mix, A-B it and A-B it, and you try to beat it.
Right.
Try to beat it. Is it just as clear? Can I get more punch? Can I have more bass? But it's a reference point that you can come off of.
Yeah. There aren't many of us who could just walk in cold to a room and sit down in front of the speakers and know what we're hearing.
No, it takes a moment.
Yeah.
And I don't care who you are. And to me, that's the most, when I'm starting a session, and I work at a lot of other studios, I'll probably spend a good half hour just screwing with it. And the same thing too, then I'll get all my effects and my reverb returns, everything, I'll balance all that out before I ever start the session. I got 4 sets of reverbs going on, everything I'd possibly use, all pre-balanced and checked. So when I start mixing, I just print the faders and go.
Right.
I have to think about, reinventing the wheel.
Right.
Here we go.
Right.
Well, but think about these speakers, like the big ones on the side, which are HR4FLs, is that the other thing that I really do, because a lot of times these days, we'll have everybody in the control room. We're not actually, even if I have amps out there, we're all in the control room. So I got 2 keyboard players, 2 guitar players, the bass, we're all in the control room playing, right? So everybody's listening to the big speakers. And so for me, it was always an issue that I needed 10 or 11 people or 8 people to hear the same sound I was hearing. So in designing speakers, for me, it was always about how can I create a field that everyone in the room will hear the same thing. And with this one, we can do a flawless 100 degrees on the horizontal plane. So if you were to go at 0 and measure 50 degrees off axis from 0, it's exactly the same. So you could be standing against the wall over there and hear the speaker perfectly. Right. Or the back. And that makes it that everybody in the room is playing, and I don't have to tell them, well, I can't hear the guitar, I can't hear this. Well, they're finally hearing everything.
Yeah.
Because if you're listening to a small speaker that has, say, a ribbon tweeter, and on axis it's pretty decent, but the second you stand up the Heiserbahn, or you move left, that's a real issue for you as a producer, because if you have anyone else listening, it's a problem. So
yeah, sure. There's a much smaller sweet spot that you need to stay in order to get the full sound quality. So let's talk a little bit more about that. You touched on a couple things there. I'm assuming you go for the equilateral triangle as much as possible with the way your monitoring is set up? Yeah,
we're trying to set it up, ideally you'd like, the center of that to be, 2.5 feet behind the mix position usually, so you get a window. In the case of our speakers, since it's so wide, if you do that, you're still great here. You could be on this fader and it sounds just as good as you're getting center. Right. The other one that I see some interesting placements and some people I've seen struggle with is speaker height. Yeah. Should the tweeter be at ear level? Should it be above? Should it be below? What's the ideal? Okay, it depends on the loudspeaker, but generally speaking, I like to see it at ear level, pretty much at ear level. The thing is that like on ours, we're 40 degrees in the vertical plane, and so where these are sitting right now, I would probably actually have to have them a few inches higher, but I can still stand up and get perfect highs with no loss. And the same thing, and it's low enough cover, even though here I can be down here and still get very uniform performance.
Right, and that's the key. Again, that sweet spot vertically is just as important as horizontally, because you are going to stand up and move around and do that, and you want to be able to.
Well, it also depends, like, this is an older style console, but it isn't quite old style because underneath it's wide open. So that stuff comes through. So as long as my mid-bass woofer is just like above the meters, usually I'm fine. It still doesn't, I'm pretty uniform performance.
Right. So the last thing we'll touch on here is subwoofer placement.
Yes.
Because we think, well, a subwoofer is omnidirectional, essentially. We can put it anywhere we want and it's going to be fine.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Well, I just made that up.
Well, no, but that's, you're not, I mean, you're stating something that most people say.
Yeah, you're right.
Right, and the thing is that it's really not. So here's the thing is, like, I was just at Sunset Sound Studio 2, and I was working on a record. Now, if I set these speakers are my Pro 2s, if I set them on the console, these speakers actually have pretty good bass down to 40 hertz. So if the room is a good control room, I'll get some pretty decent bass, but this particular one had quite a null between front to back. Because the back wall is here, right?
Yeah.
So I tried aiming the speaker straight up. I tried aiming it sideways. I ended up bringing the sub bass around, and I set it right here. So it was a single sun 10 facing this way. And I got fantastic bass that didn't build up on the sides. I got tons of punch, and then and I was able to match it alignment because there's an adjustment on the sub to get I could delay it to match the front speakers for sitting there. It kicks ass. I mean, I could get a really big, huge, punchy sound, and I would never do that. But that's what I had to do in this room.
That's what worked. Yeah.
Because there was another room I did where they had some very peculiar walls and angles and things, and so we were getting a huge build up on the sides and then huge holes in the middle all over the place. And so I ended up taking the subs, and when they were going straight like this, the wavelength was such was a null. So I ended up taking a double 18 cabinet and having it face straight up. And that gave me another 7 feet of length. So by the time it got back here, it didn't cancel. And I was able to get perfect bass here that I didn't get when it was aimed straight ahead. I got a complete null. When I aimed it straight up, I got great bass.
Right.
So
you have to try things.
Yeah, I wish, I won't call it the dark art. but
they're giving some trial and error.
If you have taste, you can experiment, you can finesse, and there's oftentimes even a room that shouldn't work can work if you are willing to spend enough time and you do enough acoustical treatment.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So do you prefer then, some people recommend 2 subs instead of 1 to try and deal with some of those things?
It just depends on the room and the situation. But yeah, usually, like with my HR4s say, the subs are really part of a complete three-way speaker. But because the subs are separate, I can aim them in different directions to find, I can still move them around to make it work.
Right.
It's not like they're part of the speaker and it is what it is, there's no way to change that. But also sometimes if I'm doing an Atmos theater and I'm working on different theaters, I'll have to find the spot in the room where I think it's adding up best. And I'll move a second set of subs there. And then I'll delay to match the fronts. And I'll figure out ways to fill in the holes. Because if you're doing a really great theater and the sweet spot has got a null of 20 dB down at 40 hertz, you're a bit lacking a lot of joy.
Right. Takes a lot of the impact out of it.
Yeah, and we call it, it's a money seat, and they better sound good in that seat. You better get some serious bass.
Right.
Well, we did a theater in Santa Barbara for a lady who runs the film festival there, and we have 28 surround channels, and we have 12 18 subs. So in this room, we did an analysis of the room to get an idea what each stuff would do, where it would cancel and such. We were able to get 20 hertz at 0 in the sweet position.
Wow.
But if we had put the subs in the front, we would have had a 9 dB null right there in the sweet spot. So we figured out other ways to do it. But we were able to get it uniform over the entire seating area. Because the problem is, if you had to boost enough to get that to 0, you'd be killing the people on the sides.
Right.
So
right.
you want to,
It's just so situationally dependent, and I'd have to say that just in the course of this few minutes we've been talking, you've shared so many important points and so many things to think about. But the one golden takeaway is there's conventional wisdom, and maybe that's a good place to start. But try stuff, experiment. You're not going to hurt anything.
No.
And so give it a try. You can always put things back.
Well, also, and it's to your taste. Like, I mean, because I've been mixing so long, when I'm listening here in stereo, I mean, it doesn't take me long to I'll play the thing I know musically, and I know exactly what the bass should be, and I can set that to say, this is how much bass I should be hearing. I know this is right.
Yeah.
Because that's what this sounds like when it's right. Mm-hmm. And then I just say, look, it's done.
Yeah, right.
So, and the phone mixing.
It's easy.
I wish it was easy.
Alan, it's such a pleasure to have you here, and I've had so much fun listening to the monitors, and man, we've learned a bunch from you in just these few minutes. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Come back soon.
Okay.
Always a pleasure.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for joining us here. We're in Studio A at Sweetwater with Alan Sides. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater.